couples whose wedding was an absolute catastrophe. What happened? Story 1, 2 things. 70 more guests showed up than were invited. Turns out Emile was inviting people and not telling us. We ran out of chairs, food, everything except wine. We had plenty of that. Someone stole the wedding gifts. Story 2, not my wedding, but a close friend's colleague. So much went wrong, but it'll summarize. Unexpected heavy rain. Wedding ceremony shifted to inside venue. Ceiling collapsed from heavy rainfall right on top of elaborate wedding cake. Luckily, the bride and groom had a very good sense of humor, and IRC, the venue, refunded a fair amount of what they had paid out of goodwill. Story 3, not my wedding, but the groom kissed me on the dance floor, touched several other women without consent. The priest was a creep and grabbed my friends, but the groom accused the bride of cheating with the bartender, who is gay and a friend of ours for years. The groom ended up throwing his ring into the woods at the end of the night. The bride stayed in a friend's hotel while he went home and went into a rage. They're actually on their honeymoon at the moment. Idiots. Story 4, the wedding was nothing as expected, but the marriage has been nothing but a blessing. It rained non-stop. The venue was outside with a gazebo-type structure. We still held it there, just closer to the middle, so we wouldn't get wet. We had a low-budget wedding, so no live band, just a DJ. We gave him the music for the first husband-wife song at rehearsal, and all was good. Once it was time for the dance, he played the wrong song 3 times, until my husband had it and left me standing in the middle while he went to put the music himself. We hired a professional photographer and also asked our families to take pics with the 3 cameras that we had. We have a total of 10 pictures for the whole thing. The professional photographer only had 6 good pictures. Everything else was ruined for some reason. The pictures taken with our cameras were all ruined also. This was 17 years ago, so I'm fuzzy on the details, but all in all, we only got 4 pictures from those cameras. We were to stay at a hotel in the honeymoon suite, and then the next day, travel to our honeymoon destination. When we arrived to the hotel around 1 in the morning, I think they had already given the honeymoon suite to a family, because they forgot it was reserved, so we had to stay in a regular room. Edit, just to clarify, because a lot are asking, this is a third world country, very poor, and at the time we had just started rebuilding after a long war. Customer service was non-existing. Technology for the pictures was really, really bad. So it was a very different time place for what we would know as normal now, or what we would expect now. At the time, if things went sideways, you tough it out and move on. There was no compensation, refunds, or anything like that. Story 5, many years ago, I worked in the wedding industry for 5 years. Video. Hey, race, a snippet of disasters. Mother of the groom got really drunk and fell onto the wedding cake, caught on camera. Best man went to the bathroom, took his wedding ring off to wash his hands, left it on the counter. Not even a minute later, he went back in, and it was gone. Never found it. Only family and friends at the wedding. Mother of the bride spilt liquid foundation down the front of her raw silk dress before they left the house. Had to wear a different outfit. Wedding reception set up and entire. Wedding for approximate 400 guests, with a totally wrong color scheme, flowers and food. There was a wedding the next day, and unbelievably, the bride and groom of that wedding had exactly the same names. First and last, bride and groom were on their honeymoon. Came back and found their house had been broken into, every stick of furniture taken, every gift taken, every wall broken, sinks ripped out, and glass smashed. Police found out it was the ex of the bride. One bride, unfortunately, miscalculated her monthly cycle, got out of the car at the church, and so my cousin recently got married to his long-term partner, and the actual wedding itself went really well. The reception directly after the ceremony, however, was marred somewhat by the bride's parents announcing halfway through the night and completely out of the blue that they would be divorcing. Story 6, not my wedding, but my parents. I wasn't around to experience it, but their friends and family still talk about it to this day. The main culprit was the heavy, heavy rain that caused minor flooding and tons of road closures. Mother was very late to the church. My father broke down, convinced that she was going to be a no-show. Not only was the taxi that was taking her to the church late, due to road closures, it also managed to hit her as she was running to get in, causing a small rip and minor staining on her dress. A few members of the bridal party were so late, they completely missed the ceremony. At the hotel reception, the DJ could not figure out how to get to the venue due to road closures and being unfamiliar with the area. The first half of the reception was basically quiet until the groomsmen found that the restaurant in the hotel had a jukebox. The restaurant let them move it to the banquet hall, where they paid quarters for music. Almost half of their guests did not come, again due to the rain. The hotel was understaffed due to the road closures, so food took a very long time to come out. A guest who must have been literally dying of hunger helped herself to the wedding cake prior to it being cut. It really sucked on the day, but now they look back on it and laugh. Whenever we're at a wedding now, and the bride is on the verge of tears due to things not going perfectly, my mom will always say, "Don't worry about it. I got hit by a car on my wedding day, and everything still worked out." Story 7, my wedding was awesome. But there was some craziness, an ambulance was called when one of my groomsmen decided to take a bite out of his pint glass and eat it on a dare he drunkenly made to himself. My wife and I only learned of this after the fact, as they were good about keeping it away from us. We had our roommate become a reverend online Universal Life Church to marry us, who did a great job. But many of the guests thought we just hired a Catholic priest. We come from Catholic families, e.g., we just referred to him as Reverend first name. Several friends were impressed with the Reverend busting moves on the dance floor, and then expressed surprise when he was drunkenly making out a large black man. We had an open bar until midnight, and then a lower-key cash bar for 2 hours after that. Most guests stayed at the venue, which was also a hotel. Our priest, and someone described as a large black man, were observed stealing a bottle of Grey Goose from the cash bar. So the next morning, when we were finalizing everything, we got to pay $300 for it, or they could call the authorities. Also, we had given our reverend a bottle of Johnny Walker along with the other groomsmen, but he just never opened his groomsman gift. Story 8, my aunt and uncle were getting married outside in fall, at a beautiful garden. All the guests arrived, but the priest did not. Finally, they got a call from the hospital saying the priest had food poisoning. So they grabbed a waiter, sent a groomsman to the Halloween store, and had a wedding where they were married by a suspiciously waitery-looking priest. Story 9, I was a groomsman in a wedding for my uncle and his fiancée. I was maybe 14 and pretty nervous. I stood up straight as a board, knees locked apparently. It turns out when you stand up with your knees locked, you start a pass-out timer. My timer ran out during the vows. My recently widowed mother was losing her, arms flailing wildly in the air as she ran to check on me, screaming, "Oh, my baby, over and over." The wedding was paused as 10 people rushed to save me. We still watch it on VHS from time to time. Pretty funny these days. My other uncle didn't put me in the wedding party a couple months later. Never found out why. Story 10, not my wedding. Thank God. Friend's sister got married. Big Italian wedding. No one but the bride is sure about the groom. Mom is helping the bride on with her dress and saying, "You can still back out. I promise I won't say anything about the money." 1 hour into the reception, the bride is drunk off her in the ladies' room, screaming, "I've made a terrible mistake." Marriage lasted, I think, for months. Then she ran off with his best friend, and he, the groom, shot himself. Story 11, my sisters. As we were sitting down to eat, a guest started screaming. The groom's mother went into cardiac arrest. I called 911. They came and attended to her, and as we were outside watching them load her into the ambulance, I heard more screaming. Someone ran out and told me that they had better come back into the venue. I run inside and see my grandfather laying on the floor. I ended up riding with him to the hospital. I think he just fainted from the commotion, but we didn't know that at the time. They took both of them to the same hospital. Doctor looked at both of them as they were being wheeled in and remarked, "Must have been one a party." Story 12, okay. Not the level of catastrophe you're probably looking for. But here goes one. The wedding was supposed to be a small family gathering. The restrictions, no children, and only bring one guest, were the subject of bitter fights, and, ultimately, us relenting on both points as the date drew nearer. The child who was the source of the most contentious of these screamed and cried through the vows. 2, the wedding was to be a beach wedding. We rented out the presidential suite at a hotel for the reception and had the exact spot on the beach picked out. Every day, for weeks preceding the wedding, the weather at the time of the ceremony was perfect. 70 degrees and a slight breeze. With the ceremony minutes away, the wind kicked up to high enough speeds that the sand on the beach was whipping up so violently we couldn't walk across it, let alone have the ceremony as planned. We therefore had to move the ceremony into the suite we had reserved for the reception. 3, the move of the ceremony was complicated by the fact that we were unable to check into the room until about 5:30 p.m., when the manager of the hotel, who, until that day, was a friend of my wife's, had promised us an early check-in so we could get set up. My mom went into managerial mode and started getting things set up, but the room was still pretty much a mess at the time of the exchanging of the vows, for my wife's brother is addicted to pills and, in his opioid-induced haze, lost the rings. 5, during the ceremony, officiated by my sister, her bosom popped out of the dress my wife specifically requested she not wear. 6, the place we ordered food from just gave most of our food away. My wife's mom was to be the one to go pick it up. She took the receipt and the emails we had exchanged about the order. When she got there, they apologized and offered to remake the portion of the food they sold to walk-in customers. She accepted, and 2 hours later, she arrived at the reception with food, where everyone was pretty wasted from the absurdly strong drinks my father-in-law was making. The only food they could have eaten in the meantime had been seized upon by seagulls. 7, hotel maintenance showed up later on in the evening, because the folks in the room above us let their bathtub overflow, and they wanted to check to make sure there were no leaks in our room. There were, so the most accessible bathroom was unavailable for a while. 8. This was September of 16, so, of course, a heated argument took place about the election. 9. The hotel oversold for that night, as is customary. I know, so my aunt who cannot walk did not have a bathroom in her room that was handicap accessible. She had expected a beach view, and, instead, looked at a wall. 10. Not technically part of the wedding, but I learned I'd been laid off in the middle of our honeymoon. Edit forgot to mention my dad forgot to bring pants. Story 13. I've told this story before on Reddit, but here are the bulleted highlights. So significant other. The wedding itself went off quickly and relatively smoothly. It was a really quick ceremony. It was before and after that were the problems. SO's stepmother told me at the bridal shower that he was never going to amount to anything, and I was making a huge mistake. SO's stepmother brought her 2 young children to that shower, even after I asked her not to. I didn't know if lady friends would have games with innuendo, as I'd never been to a wedding shower before. SO's brother brought an uninvited and unannounced girlfriend to the rehearsal and then demanded I include her in the wedding. I'd never met her before. They were from out of state, and he didn't tell us in advance that he was bringing a date. The girls stood outside and smoked the entire time. SO's stepmother gave men in the wedding party money to take him out to a strip club and get a hooker. SO's mother cried because we had not put together an intricate ceremony that she could participate in. Though we told her in advance, it was better to do nothing than to try and include everyone's stepmother bio. Mother, me, mom, grandmother's. SO's brother came to my hotel room the night before the wedding, drunk and crying because he and the new girlfriend got into a fight. He said she tried to stab him with a steak knife. He then told me I'd made a mistake and had chosen the wrong brother, lunged at me with his tongue out, and started groping me. Next morning, I walk out into the common area where people are having breakfast. SO's father is there and begins to insult my family because of how cheap everything looks. My dad was sick and unemployed at the time, but FIL knew that, which made it more hurtful. I reminded FIL of this and the fact that I'd paid for everything myself. Ceremony goes fine. Hooray, reception time. SO's stepmother insults several of my friends' looks as they're trying to eat. One of my bridesmaids is a woman with multiple disabilities. I worked for her and provided care for many years when I worked in social services. Groomsmen make fun of her, and they ask why all the retards at this wedding. My grandfather sees a tattoo of a dragon through the back of my dress. Proceeds to shove me and tell me the Bible says dragons are satanic. I'm going now. My mother told everyone it was a good thing I'd got my own dress, because there was no way hers could have been let out enough to fit me. I wasn't remotely overweight. Maid of honor's mother breaks down and starts crying when she hears Nat King Cole playing. Apparently, it was her and her recently deceased husband's favorite song, and she is absolutely bawling in the middle of the reception. Maid of honor, and I have to take her outside and calm her down while someone changes the music. The best part is, we had legally gotten married at a courthouse 6 months before, told no one, and only had the wedding because of our families. Story 14. My in-laws are from a country and culture that does huge, elaborate weddings. My husband is their only child. I am not a member of their ethnicity or religion. To say they were disappointed with my desire to have a low-key, simple wedding is a massive understatement. Ed, I'm not saying where they are from. Stop asking. Story 15. The father of the bride and his brother get drunk. Nothing out of the ordinary, and they are harmless drunks but can get a little mouthy. A fight breaks out, and the cops come, and of all the people they arrest, it's the dad and the uncle. As I said, they are harmless but mouthy, and the local cops didn't like being called mother, so they beat the out of them. The uncle was a cop from the neighboring city, and protocol is if a cop is arrested, the arrested guy's department has to come pick them up. So the police show up to get their drunken comrade and see that he's been tuned up, and that doesn't go over very well, and guns are drawn and word are exchanged, but nobody is hurt. This goes to court, and the judge's only statement is, there's a fight of 50 people, and the only 2 you arrest is the father of the bride and his brother. Case dismissed. But that wasn't the end of it, because they still had to deal with the local PD beating up a cop and his brother. Sadly, the blue wall was in full effect, and the uncle cop wouldn't testify against the guys who beat him up. The bride and groom had a great time and didn't know anyone went to jail until after the reception. Story 16. A friend's wedding. Worst one Eve been to one. One of the bridesmaids said she would be part of the party and play the piano for the whole ceremony only if the bride refused to use the submit to husbands will bullshit during vows. Bride agreed, and then an hour before the ceremony told the bridesmaid that she was going back on her promise. Have you ever heard wedding music played angrily on a piano? How about having the piano player need to stare at you while you're in the pews the whole time to try and keep their cool, too? During the sermon portion of this wedding, the pastor started the speech with, if there's one thing I know about this marriage, it is that this will not last. Edit additional detail, sort of requested and now provided. The pastor followed his statement up with some bullshit about real marriage not starting until you get to heaven. This marriage on earth never lasts, and then it lasts forever. And he used a shitty self-centered metaphor to emphasize the point, and that was the entire sermon. Minus 9,910 would not attend this ceremony again. Story 17, not mine, but at my sister's wedding marrying a Marine she just met, I got into a fist fight. Best man threw up during speech. Her dress caught on fire. My uncle announced he was leaving my aunt for a 21-year-old. Drunk cousin spilled the beans about my sister being pregnant to my very conservative grandma, and we all got food poisoning for the caterer. Hopefully her next one this winter is better. Story 18, my mom used to do music at weddings. She said the worst one she ever did was when the bride was 8 months pregnant with twins. The groom's family hated her for not having an abortion, not giving the kids up for adoption, wearing white at the wedding, trapping him, etc. Real awful stuff. Anyway, they all still show up for the wedding, but refuse to stand when the processional starts. For a church wedding where you're supposed to stand, minister asks what's wrong. They tell him the service and say they're protesting the wedding. Minister ends up yelling at them and says they'll stand or hell kick them out of his church. On the other hand, my mom said the best wedding she ever did was a couple who wanted to be married as quickly as possible. Processional, vows, recessional, just over a 3-minute ceremony. Story 19, I had a 104-degree fever. It was 86 degrees at an outdoor wedding. I passed out mid-ceremony, stood up, then vomited in the grass. I sat down, was given Gatorade, then vomited again. We finished the ceremony in lawn chairs. Me without my jacket and with a wet towel around my neck during reception. Cousin threatened to kick my wife's cousins because he asked my cousin not to smoke next to his baby. Went to honeymoon, anyways left honeymoon after 1 day, and went to the hospital, didn't die. Huge success. Married 11 years, 3 kids, 4th on the way. Story 20, my friend's venue burned down during the reception. They were in the paper and on the evening news. The venue made things right with all of it, but that was a heck of a way to start a marriage. Story 21, my wife and I had a beach wedding planned in Key West. We were on a cruise, but had some family on the hot with us, and some who flew to Key West directly. Long story short, it was too windy, and we couldn't safely port in Key West. We enjoyed the rest of the cruise, and just did our vows at the reception we had planned back home. Now we celebrate 2 different anniversary dates, and it's a fun memory. Story 22-1, the DJ took the money and went out of business and didn't bother letting me know. So we played iPhone music on a little speaker all night too. There were two separate fires, a grease fire from the catfish being fried on site, and a fire from the fireworks set off at the wrong time, right after the ceremony, when it was still light out. Although if they'd been set off at night, everybody would have been too drunk to put out the fire. So I guess that was a good thing. 3. It was about 20 degrees warmer than usual for the season, so I was absolutely dying in my very elaborate dress, which wasn't finished until 2 days before the wedding because the seamstress was fired and nobody at the boutique bothered to check on her work until my mother swept in and started kicking. That entire chain went out of business a year later, for I ended up hating most of the pictures. The photographer was not very creative, and I ended up having to direct her for most of the shoot, which was exhausting. 5. Bonus, a hurricane hit our honeymoon destination the day before we got there, so it was pouring the entire time, except, of course, the day we left. On the other hand, people still tell me our wedding was the prettiest they'd ever been to, and the actual ceremony was the most moving experience of my life. I would do so many things differently if I could, but a wedding isn't a marriage, and my marriage is pretty great. Story 23, mother-in-law made the wedding about herself. Not the biggest issue, though. She did 2 things I'll never forget. 1, made the table layout for our guests, and completely left off the family friend and his wife that performed the funeral service for my mother who had passed less than a month before my wedding. 2, again, my mother-in-law, drunk as already on wedding wine before we even started getting dressed, approached me right as we were doing the group pictures and said, "Congratulations. Looks like I'm now the new mom." And then she noticed the rage-filled look on my face and quietly said, "In-law." She was sitting next to the rose I had placed on my mother's chair before the service started. Needless to say, that entire day was an emotional roller coaster. Oh, and the night before at the rehearsal dinner, my sister, who was a bridesmaid, totaled my mother's car. She was illegally driving, while intoxicated, right in front of the restaurant, and had my soon-to-be wife hold her purse while she spoke to the police without telling her there was a pipe and bag of weed in it. Never forget, May to June of 2017. Story 24, my cousin got married, and her family is Mexican. Groom's family are Irish. They all went out the night before the wedding and of course got smashed, and one of the Irish family members asked to see a watch of a Mexican family members. He put it on and walked away. That turned into a drunken brawl between the entire groom's family versus The entire bride's family. The groom was late as he and all the Mexicans were taken to jail on assault charges. While the Irish guys were let go, the wedding was hours late, but happened. Story 25 off topic, but I love that one story about the future mother-in-law that insisted on wearing white to the wedding, so the maid of honor took matters in her own hands and accidentally spilled red wine all over the mother-in-law's dress. Maid of honor legit took her job seriously, and the bride totally made the right choice with her haha. Story 26, my uncle decided that I should run the camera at the wedding since I was the most technically literate out of the family. What he failed to realize was that I was technically literate because I pressed all the buttons to figure out what they do. So his wedding video is a combination of weird zooming, different lighting settings flashing on and off, and parts cutting in and out as I fiddle with other settings. The last minute of them walking out of the church looked great though once I got everything dialed in. Story 27, my mother-in-law accidentally on purpose destroyed our favor boxes. Our photographer had a stroke before the wedding, but assured us she would still come and take pictures. She came, but without her camera. Our cat peed on my wife's wedding gown, then ran away the night before the wedding, forcing the bridesmaids to hunt through the neighborhood at night for it. The wedding cake was disgusting and in the wrong colors. The restaurant that was to host our rehearsal dinner canceled at the last minute, leaving us to cram 50-some people in the kitchen area of a local seafood place. They were extremely kind and accommodating. The mother and father of the bride showed up 10 minutes before the wedding, not even dressed, wanting us to help them get ready. And for good measure, on our honeymoon, we had the license plate stolen off our car. Happily married 10 years now. Story 28, a bandmate of mine was playing a wedding, and after finishing the first set, they were shown into the green room and told that a small selection had been prepared for them to eat. They started tucking into the above-average rider and thinking they were glad the food was good because the pay wasn't up to what they normally charged. Turns out they had been shown to the wrong room and had inadvertently eaten all the wedding food, cake and everything. The ham sandwiches and cans of Coke were in the next room. Story 29, not my wedding, but I was working a wedding for dinner service, and during the repetition out in the yard of an event hall, as the bride was walking down the aisle, the automatic sprinklers turned on under everyone's chairs, and everyone went running and was soaking wet. Honestly, it seemed they thought it was more funny than anything, but I can't even imagine. Story 30, a family member's almost wedding. Groom got cold feet and left a few days before the ceremony. But as the bride's family had traveled from all over, we decided to stay at the hotel and have fun anyway. On the day their ceremony should have been, a dead baby blue whale washed up on a local beach, so we went to see it. On the way to see said dead whale, a dog owned by someone in the wedding party went missing. He fell off a cliff and was found by Coast Guards that evening. On the upside, she's happily married to a way better guy now. Story 31, reception. We forgot to grab my wife's dress, so I borrowed her car to get it back. Forgot to take off the emergency brake. I ripped a tire trying to avoid hitting someone when the brakes got too hot. Story 32. I threw up the entire time of my reception, but hey, I was fine for the ceremony and got married, so the day was a success. Ladies, always size up your wedding dresses and never assume the dress shops have any idea what they're ordering for you. I went off their recommendation for size, and it was way too small. Of course, the wedding industry doesn't do returns exchanges, so you're stuck with what you ordered. I couldn't get it let out at all. And would like to add this plus the 98F weather that day to the outcome of my health P. By the way, I was recommended a size 0 when I'm typically a 2 to 4 in dresses. Not way off, but wedding dresses apparently come small anyway. Whoa. Story 33, my wedding was a disaster. Most of what went wrong was that we hired a college student to do the bartending. He came with a recommendation, so it's not like we just picked a rando. Anyways, our wedding wasn't super big, about 50 to 60 people. We had the bar set up for him before he got there, and when guests started to arrive, they started asking for drinks. Apparently, this overwhelmed him, and after 15 minutes, he just left without telling anyone. Left. My husband is from an affluent area, but me, I am mountain folk. All my friends and family are mountain folk. Never leave mountain folk alone with a bar full of liquor. They all started making their own drinks, and within 45 minutes, we were completely out of hard alcohol, and everyone was completely hammered, which led to a lot of other problems. First, a good friend of mine, we shall call her Rachel, gets really wild when she drinks. As I was walking down the aisle, she literally pulled out her and flashed me while yelling, "We ate the shake." My father, who is a pervy old man, took her behavior as an invitation, and after the ceremony, made it his goal to get down her pants in front of my stepmom, which led to my stepmom crying, my stepbrother yelling at Rachel and Rachel's boyfriend, then getting a fist fight with my stepbrother. During the entire evening, we had several guests puking where they shouldn't and passing out in rooms that weren't part of the wedding. Behind the scenes, our caterer was 2 hours late and showed up stoned out of his mind. We ate 2 hours late, which really didn't help sober anyone up. But I will say, when it did come out, it was some of the best food I have ever had. My husband and I had enough by 9 p.m. and snuck out the back without saying goodbye to anyone. We laughed the entire way home about the shit show we had just witnessed. Overall, we should have just eloped like we wanted to. And while our wedding day was a wreck, our marriage is wonderful, and tying the knot with him was the best decision I have ever made. Story 34, groomsman here. There was a massive power outage in Seattle. Power was out for a day and a half. The power came on in time for the wedding, which was great. The food they served was not great. It wasn't refrigerated. Because of the power outage, about 70 of the guests got food poisoning, including me. The bride had a case so bad she spent her wedding night in the emergency room at the hospital. It really messed her up, and she had to go to therapy for it. Story 35, my best friend got engaged and took a total hands-off approach to wedding planning and let her FMIL make pretty much all the decisions. As her friend, the bridal party, we were surprised because things weren't really her style, but figured whatever, it's her wedding. She finds out after all the deposits and down payments have been made that she has aplastic anemia, which has been causing her severe depression, complete exhaustion, and is the source of her apathy. She spends what would have been the time for the bridal shower, bachelorette party, etc., in the hospital or recovering. Finally felt better enough to attend her own wedding. Wedding would have been nice despite being the total opposite of what my friend probably would have planned for herself, but it was unseasonably cold and it rained. Story 36, obligatory not me. But intro, one of my oldest friends got married at the Renaissance Festival, as is very befitting of her if you know her. I was the MOH and road trip for 2 hours with the rest of the bridal party. Maids and groomsmen split across 2 cars to the fairgrounds. We were told beforehand that tickets would be waiting for us at the box office, and all we had to do was tell them who we were with and would be let in. No such tickets existed. Despite being in 2011, only a few people in our group had phones, but it mattered little since reception is terrible at the festival. We called and called and called the bride and everyone in her family, but we got no answer even on calls that did go through. All the festival employees would do is confirm there was a wedding taking place that day, but would not give us the name and refuse to even go check to tell the bride that her entire wedding party was stuck outside. We sat outside in the courtyard entrance for about 2 hours as the time of the ceremony ticked dangerously ever closer. Finally, with about 20 minutes to go, I spotted a white shape storming across the courtyard towards us. It was the bride, in her dress and with rollers in her hair. Somehow word had gotten to her about our predicament, and she came to resolve the matter herself. She gave the employees at the gate wholly over the matter, and we were all rushed inside with the thinnest apologies you can imagine from them. On top of all of that, it turned out she had paid for the bridesmaid's hair and makeup to be professionally applied, something there was now no time for. Half of the bridesmaids showed up with bedhead and no makeup at all, and that's how they entered the ceremony. I managed to put a sloppy, vaguely medieval-looking braid circlet around my head as we walked to the backstage area where the procession was to begin. Given the location, it was requested the bridal party men and women dress in kind. Not the worst thing in the world, really. I was in college at the time, and cash was scarce. But given that the bride and I have been friends since age 10, and I was the MOH, I wanted to make the most of it. I spent $60 on a deluxe medieval princess dress from Target, just happened to be around Halloween. So score with approval from the bride. It wasn't exactly Game of Thrones quality, but neither did it immediately look like something I bought on the relative cheap. The rest of the bridal party didn't put as much effort into it. They, too, seemed to do their shopping from the grocery store after Halloween clearance bin, and it was a sea of crushed velvet, plastic swords, polyester blends, so thin they were see-through, and one pirate costume. A high school production of Macbeth would have looked better. The ceremony went off all right, even though regular festival goers kept poking their heads in. At the reception, the groom tried to be funny and smashed the cake into the bride's face, and it smeared her lipstick and somehow fell off the spoon and down the front of her dress, inside and out. It left a spot of an unfortunate shape and colored down her bodice that her mom and sister desperately tried to get out. The whole thing was interesting. 5 years and 1 baby later, the husband suddenly up and announced he wanted out, and they split, so yeah. Story 37, not mine. But I used to work on cruise ships, and people would come to get married all the time. One of the weddings I worked, the bride forgot the dress at home, and the groom forgot his passport, which means he couldn't board the ship. The only problem is they lived 2 hours away. Still not sure how that ended up for them. Story 38, not me, but my baby sister was in a wedding in Houston in the middle of the summer. AC went out before the ceremony. Easily 110, my sister was the flower girl and threw up during the ceremony. I believe some of it got on the bride's dress. And then she passed out. My parents were mortified. The couple were really chill about it, though. Edit Knit. Story 39, right after we said I do. My father-in-law collapsed and passed out. He came to briefly and then went down again while we waited for the ambulance to arrive. He vehemently did not want to go to the hospital, but was finally convinced and admitted for the night. Luckily, he was okay, just dehydrated and embarrassed, and we were able to pick him up the next day.